Shortly after the death of Adana's mother, her life began to change drastically. Her father, the powerful Mr. Jair, known and respected by everyone in the city, remarried Zuri, a woman who, in everyone's eyes, seemed like the perfect example of kindness and gentleness. At first, Adana even believed that her new stepmother would be someone she could rely on. However, once the marriage was solidified, Zuri's true nature emerged. Behind that sweet smile and caring behavior hid a bitter and cruel woman, entirely consumed by a sickening jealousy. Adana was the image of her late mother. Long black hair, natural beauty, and above all, a kindness that charmed everyone around her. These qualities, which should have been a source of pride, were actually what awakened a silent and dangerous fury in Zuri. Little by little, she began to treat Adana with contempt, turning the girl's life into a living hell. Zuri never missed a single opportunity to humiliate the beautiful young woman, whether in public or at home. She invented absurd stories about her stepdaughter, accusing her of things she would never be capable of doing. She spread rumors around the city that Adana was not as perfect as she seemed, insinuating that the young woman hid shameful secrets. Slowly, Zuri's lies began to erode the trust others had in Adana, and the girl felt that her life was falling apart. Despite all the difficulties, Adana tried to stay strong, remembering the lessons her mother had taught her. No matter how cruel Zuri was, she couldn't allow hatred to take over her heart. However, the days were becoming increasingly difficult. She hoped that at some point her father would notice how much she was suffering, how the sparkle in her eyes had faded, and how the smile that once lit up her face was becoming rarer. In her darkest moments, she remembered a phrase her mother always said, "Good always prevails, my daughter, no matter how long it takes." And that was what she held on to, hoping that one day, Zuri would let go of that inexplicable hatred and treat her like family. But unfortunately, that never happened. Mr. Jair was always very busy. He spent more time away, taking care of business, and when he finally came home, Zuri would already be waiting with a forced smile and a new complaint about his daughter. "Jair, I don't know what to do with this girl anymore. Today she refused to help me with the chores. She spoke to me so disrespectfully. I do everything for her, and what do I get in return? Disobedience and selfishness," she would say, her voice filled with drama and manipulation. Adana, sitting at the table, would lower her head, feeling the weight of the injustice. She tried to find the strength to defend herself, but the fear of being misunderstood consumed her. With a deep sigh, she finally said, "Father, I swear it's not true. I tried to help, but Zuri—" However, before she could finish her sentence, she was quickly interrupted. "Adana!" Her father spoke firmly, raising his hand as a sign for her to be quiet. "I've told you to be a good girl to your stepmother. Zuri is my wife, and you have to respect her. I don't want to hear any more complaints like this. You two are the women in my life, and all I want is peace in this house." Those words cut deep into Adana. She wanted to cry, scream, beg for him to see what was really happening. But instead, she simply murmured, "Yes, father." Her heart ached more each day, feeling increasingly alone, abandoned by the one who was supposed to protect her. She looked at Zuri, who, with a satisfied smile, cast a look of superiority, as if she knew exactly what she was doing and how to manipulate Jair. This left Adana feeling increasingly lost. At night, when silence filled the house, the young woman would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, reliving every painful moment. "Will he ever see the truth?" she whispered to herself through her tears. Days and months passed, and Adana continued to endure her stepmother's lies and accusations. One afternoon, she decided to walk through the city, trying to find some peace amid the chaos that had become her life. As she walked, she saw a man sitting on the sidewalk, wearing torn clothes and a sad expression, begging for alms. Without hesitation, Adana approached him, and even though she had little, she offered him a small amount. The man, with tear-filled eyes, thanked her in a way that deeply touched her heart. She continued on her way, trying to push away thoughts of the home she would soon return to, filled with Zuri's humiliations and cruelties. That act of kindness gave her brief relief, But soon the weight of reality settled back on her shoulders. On the way, she met some friends and for a few moments managed to smile to feel free, almost as if life were normal. They strolled around the city, talking about dreams and the future, and time passed quickly. When Adana finally decided it was time to return home, she felt a heaviness in her chest because she knew Zuri would be waiting for her with a storm of questions and accusations. Upon arriving, the scene that awaited her was familiar and disheartening. The house was a complete mess, and Zuri stood at the door, arms crossed, her face twisted in a furious expression. "Where were you? Why did you take so long?" Adana no longer cared to try to answer. She knew that anything she said would only fuel her stepmother's anger. Over time, she had learned that in the house where she lived, her voice had no value, and her opinion didn't matter. Silently, Adana began to follow orders, cleaning up the mess while Zuri's screams echoed in the background. After a long time, Adana could barely stand. Her arms were sore from scrubbing the floor, and her legs trembled with exhaustion after spending hours doing all the chores Zuri had commanded. When she finally finished everything, she dragged herself to her room, yearning for a moment of peace, even if it was just enough time to change her clothes and gather herself before dinner. But she barely had time to breathe before hearing her father call for everyone to come to the table. He had always been a man of few words, rigid in his posture, and with little patience for domestic issues. Unaware of what had happened earlier, he asked Zuri to call Adana. However, with a calculating look, Zuri was quick to twist the truth. "She's in her room, upset with me. I only asked her a simple question about where she was this afternoon, and she got offended," Zuri said, with a false expression of innocence. Jair, tired after a long day of work, felt his temper rise. He was already exhausted from the constant arguments and disputes that Zuri made sure to keep alive. His patience, already thin, quickly ran out. "Adana!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the house. The stern tone made Adana jump. She hated hearing her father yell. He rarely raised his voice, but when he did, it was a sign that things were about to get worse. Trembling, she hurried to the dining room, where she found her father with an impatient look, and Zuri sitting next to him, wearing that satisfied smirk on her face, as if she enjoyed watching the scene unfold. "I don't know what's been going on with you lately," Mr. Jair began in a calmer tone but still full of authority, "but if this attitude doesn't change, I will send you to another city to study far from here. Alone." The words hurt like knives in Adana's heart. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. It was as if her father was ready to get rid of her, as if she were a burden. The pain was so intense that she felt her body grow cold. She looked at the floor, unable to face either her father or Zuri. How could he believe her stepmother's lies? How could he not see how much she was suffering in that house, which felt more like a prison? But even with her heart in pieces, Adana remained silent because arguing was pointless. Her words were never heard, and at that moment, all she wanted was to disappear. The next morning, already weary from the tensions at home, Adana decided to stay by the door, watching people pass by. The busy movement of the street, though chaotic, brought her a sense of peace. The men and women hurrying by made Adana reflect on her own life. Why did everything seem so hard for her? The love she sought from her father never came, and Zuri, always manipulative, seemed to take pleasure in making her life difficult. As her thoughts wandered through these questions, something caught her attention. A ragged man with torn and dirty clothes was slowly walking down the street, holding his stomach from hunger, with a lost and desperate look. Adana's heart tightened as she saw him in such a miserable state. He seemed on the brink of despair, begging for alms to buy some food, but people passed by without paying him any attention. His thin face, marked by hunger, reflected a suffering that Adana knew well. Not the hunger for food, but the hunger for affection, dignity, to be seen. Deeply moved by the scene, she did not hesitate. She approached him and, with a sweet voice, asked him to wait. "I'll get something for you to eat, just wait a moment," she said with a gentle smile, trying to offer some sense of hope. The man, whose name she later discovered to be Taj, could hardly believe the kindness of the young woman. His eyes, which had been dull, brightened briefly with gratitude. Adana quickly went inside, grabbed a bowl, and filled it with what was left of the previous night's dinner. When she returned, she handed the food to Taj with a smile that seemed to brighten the man's entire day. With trembling hands, he took the bowl as if it were a treasure. "Thank you, miss. Thank you so much," he said, almost voiceless, before taking the first bite with a voracity that showed he hadn't eaten in days. While Taj ate, Adana watched from a distance in silence. He was young, perhaps not much older than her, but life on the streets had taken its toll. His dirty clothes and disheveled hair told stories of sleepless nights and endless days of hunger. Adana didn't know why, but she felt a connection with him. Maybe it was because, in some way, they both felt trapped in their realities, waiting for a change. As Taj walked away, holding the bowl like a trophy, Adana stood still for a few minutes, reflecting on what had just happened. Amid her own pain and confusion, she had managed to do something good, something that brought momentary relief to her troubled heart. Taj left smiling, perhaps for the first time in a long time. Meanwhile, Zuri, always watchful and suspicious, observed everything through a crack in the window. Her narrow eyes, filled with envy, followed Adana's every move as she offered food to the beggar. Hatred simmered in her chest. How could it be that, after everything she had done to destroy that girl, she could still manage to smile? And it wasn't just any smile. It was a genuine smile, something Zuri hadn't known or felt in a long time. Seeing the gratitude in the beggar's eyes as he received help from Adana disgusted her. Everything about her irritated Zuri. Her kindness, her beauty, her gentle demeanor. Zuri wanted Adana to be seen as an ungrateful and disobedient daughter, someone who didn't deserve anyone's affection. But to her frustration, it always seemed to be the opposite. People adored Adana. And you there? Are you enjoying today's story? You're going to be surprised by what's to come in Adana's life. But first, I want to know where you're watching us from, and if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any new stories. As the hatred grew, Zuri had a sudden realization. A perverse idea formed in her mind, something she was convinced would finally make Adana learn her lesson. This time, she won't get away unscathed. Zuri thought as a malevolent smile began to spread across her lips. She stepped away from the window, closed her eyes for a moment, and took a deep breath, savoring the destruction she had just conceived. Zuri knew that the beggar would be the key to finally getting rid of Adana, to removing her from her life for good. As soon as Adana entered the house, still calm after her generous act, Zuri, with silent and calculated steps, set out in search of the beggar. She had to find him. If she could manipulate him the right way, she could use him against Adana. The street was emptier now, and Zuri walked quickly, looking around. "Where did he go?" she muttered to herself, picking up the pace. Zuri was not one to miss opportunities, and she knew this was the perfect moment to execute her plan. In her mind, the scene was already playing out. Adana will understand there's no place for her in this house, in this life, Zuri whispered with a dark gleam in her eyes. This beggar has no idea what he's getting into, but he'll serve my purposes well. As Zuri walked the streets of the city, she began imagining all the ways she could manipulate the situation. She thought about the words she would say to the beggar, the promises she could make to ensure he would be on her side. With a little money or even food, she could easily convince him to do her bidding. She had no doubt that the beggar would accept anything she offered. Finally, Zuri spotted the beggar in the distance, sitting in a corner, still savoring the last of the food Adana had given him. She smiled with satisfaction. From this moment on, that man would be her tool, her key piece in the destruction of Adana. With a wicked smile, she approached Taj. Her eyes gleamed with a mix of disdain and malice as she stared at the ragged man. Taj, who was still savoring the remnants of Adana's kindness, could hardly believe what he was seeing. A woman so elegant, so refined, was now speaking to him. He quickly realized that Zuri was different. She didn't have the same gentleness in her eyes as Adana. There was something dark about her, something that sent a chill down his spine. But still, Taj remained where he was, curious and surprised by this sudden attention. "You!" Zuri said with a controlled voice. I have an offer that could change your life. If you accept, you'll never have to beg for food or sleep on the streets again. You'll have a dignified life, and more than that, you'll have someone by your side who truly deserves you. The words hit Taj like a bomb. He blinked a few times in disbelief, trying to understand what she was proposing. His mind raced, trying to figure out if this was some cruel joke or a trap. Confused, he asked, What do you want from me? With a cruel smile on her lips, Zuri stepped closer, leaning slightly so only Taj could hear. All you have to do is marry a young woman, a very beautiful young woman, and then simply disappear with her. It doesn't matter where you go. The important thing is that she doesn't return. She's not needed. I want you to take her out of my life forever. Taj felt the impact of the name like a punch to the stomach. Adana, the same young woman who had given him food just hours earlier, with a smile that made him feel, for a brief moment, worthy of attention. The shock on his face was clear, but Zuri, relentless, continued, You may think I'm joking, but I assure you, I'm very serious. I want you to take Adana far away from here, and in return, I'll give you a life you could never have dreamed of. You'll be her first man. Believe me, she is pure. And with that, you'll gain more than just gratitude. It'll be a unique opportunity. Taj tried to process everything at once. His initial reaction was one of disgust. He wanted to say no, wanted to get up and leave. But Zuri was skilled. She knew how to manipulate people, how to play on their weaknesses. She saw the internal struggle in Taj and struck at just the right moment. Think about it, she said, leaning even closer. You're on the streets with nothing. Who's going to offer you something like this again? Besides, Adana will be by your side. And there's nothing wrong with taking her to another place, right? No one will care. For a moment, Taj felt tempted. He knew his life was miserable, and the thought of a stable life, a chance to rise again, seemed irresistible. Zuri, noticing his hesitation, pushed even harder. She won't reject you. Adana is sweet, naive, and she'll trust you. This is a golden opportunity to start a new life. You'll be the first man to have her. And after that, you can go wherever you want. Still dazed, Taj finally gave in. He didn't want to harm Adana, but Zuri's promises of a better life and the temptation of being the first in someone so beautiful and pure were too strong for him to resist. All right, he murmured almost voicelessly, feeling torn between what he knew was right and what he saw as a chance to escape his misery. I accept. Zuri smiled with satisfaction. Good boy, she said. I'll return soon with all the details. Don't worry, you just need to do as I say, and everything will go perfectly. She turned and walked away, leaving Taj alone with a mix of fear, anxiety, and regret, knowing that he had just made a pact that would change his life and Adana's forever. Zuri returned home with a triumphant smile on her lips, savoring the success of the plan she was about to put into action. The beautiful young woman was in the garden, tending to the plants, unaware of what was to come. When Zuri called her with that sweet and treacherous voice, Adana, unsuspecting, approached. Adana, come here, I need to talk to you, Zuri said, pretending to be concerned. As soon as Adana got close enough, Zuri threw herself to the ground, screaming as if she had been pushed, falling dramatically in front of Adana. Help! Help! She screamed, clutching her chest as if gravely injured. Adana stood paralyzed. The scene seemed like a nightmare, something surreal that she couldn't comprehend. She just stood there, frozen, while Zuri's shrill voice echoed through the garden. At that moment, Jair, returning from work, heard his wife's desperate cries. Alarmed, he ran toward the sound, worried about what might have happened. When he arrived at the garden, Zuri was on the ground, crying and writhing in pain, while Adana stood nearby, in shock, not understanding anything. What's going on here? Jair asked, his voice full of concern and confusion. He rushed to his wife's side, who immediately began to dramatize the situation even more. It was her. Adana pushed me. I just wanted to talk to her, and she attacked me, Zuri said through sobs, her voice filled with false pain and accusation. Adana, incredulous, shook her head. No, father, she's lying. I didn't do anything. But Jair wasn't willing to listen. His eyes, once full of affection for Adana, were now clouded by Zuri's manipulation. Adana, go to your room. Now! He shouted, not giving her a chance to explain. With tears in her eyes, she tried to argue, but his fury was uncontrollable. I didn't do anything. I swear, she said, her voice breaking, but Jair didn't want to hear it. Go to your room now, before I lose my temper completely. He was so caught up in the scene Zuri had created that he couldn't see the truth. Adana, desperate and not knowing what else to do, ran to her room, slamming the door and throwing herself onto the bed. Tears fell uncontrollably as her heart shattered. Zuri, realizing she had won another battle, began to persuade her husband. Jair, something needs to be done about Adana. She's out of control. You saw what she did to me today. If you don't take action, she's going to cause more problems. Maybe it's time to teach her a lesson. She needs to learn to be more humble, more respectful. Her voice was sweet, but her words were filled with malice. Jair, still shocked by what he had just witnessed, was vulnerable to his wife's manipulation. He didn't want to believe that his daughter, his dear Adana, could be capable of something so cruel, but the scene he had witnessed said otherwise. Maybe you're right. Maybe Adana does need a lesson. She's changed and I don't know what to do anymore, Jair said, clearly shaken. Zuri knew she had planted the seed of doubt in his heart, and now all she had to do was wait for her plan to unfold. Still processing everything, he looked at Zuri with a mix of confusion and disbelief. But what kind of lesson, Zuri? What are you suggesting? Zuri paused dramatically, as if thinking deeply about something grand. With an almost angelic smile, she proposed her cruel idea. I know what can fix this. Let's marry Adana off to someone who will make her understand the value of things. Someone who lives a simple life. I know a man with all those characteristics, a beggar. He would be the perfect husband for her. Only then will she truly learn how to treat people with respect. Jair was stunned. The idea seemed too absurd to be true. Marry my daughter to a beggar? Are you crazy? That's too cruel. He stood up indignantly. But Zuri, always persuasive, approached him with that sweet voice she knew so well how to use when she wanted to manipulate. Jair, think about it. I'm not saying this out of malice. It's for Adana's own good. She needs to learn humility and respect for others. If we keep protecting her, she'll never change. Don't you want the best for your daughter? The beggar won't harm her. He'll just show her what real life is like, without all the privileges she thinks she has. Jair hesitated. The idea still seemed absurd, but Zuri's words, always so carefully calculated, began to make sense to his tired mind. Maybe Zuri was right. Maybe Adana did need a lesson. He sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on his shoulders. I just want what's best for Adana, he murmured, looking at the floor. Zuri realized she was winning. And that's exactly what I'm proposing. The best for her. A lesson she'll never forget. Still reluctant, but too exhausted to resist Zuri's manipulation, Jair finally nodded in agreement. All right, do what you think is best. Zuri smiled victoriously, but hid her triumph behind a mask of false compassion. You'll see. It will be the best for her. Meanwhile, Adana remained locked in her room, unaware of what was happening. She was devastated, tears streaming down her face. Zuri's false accusation made her feel powerless. Suddenly, Jair knocked on the door, asking to talk, but she didn't respond. The next morning, just as the sun began to rise, Zuri, with her plans in mind, went to find Taj, the beggar who had accepted her proposal. She invited him to her house, with promises that everything was about to be resolved. He followed her, not fully aware of the magnitude of what was about to happen. When they arrived, Zuri made him wait in the living room while she went to call Adana. Adana, her eyes still swollen from crying, was summoned by Zuri with a coldness that chilled the air. Adana, come to the living room. Your father and I have something important to tell you. Unsuspecting what was about to happen, she approached with a heavy heart, filled with fear. When she entered the room, she saw Taj sitting there, looking nervous and uncomfortable. She recognized him immediately, but didn't understand why he was there. That's when Zuri, with a voice dripping with disguised cruelty, made the announcement that threw Adana into a pit of despair. Adana, you are engaged. Taj here will be your future husband. And soon you will be married. The room fell into a silence that seemed to last an eternity. Adana looked at Taj's face, then at her father's, who was standing there, head bowed, unable to look at her. Adana's world collapsed in that moment. This is a joke, right? Her voice came out weak, almost pleading for it not to be true. But Zuri's hard expression and her father's silence made it clear that this was real. Devastated and heartbroken, Adana felt herself sinking into a sea of sadness and despair. I'm destined to live a life of misery and sorrow, she thought as tears filled her eyes. As tears streamed down Adana's face, Taj watched her in silence, too ashamed to speak. He knew this was wrong, but at the same time, he felt trapped by the promise he had made to Zuri. Every time he saw Adana, something inside him churned. She was so broken, so distant from the young woman who had smiled when she gave him food. Now she barely left her room, isolated from everyone and everything. The entire town began to murmur about the unusual engagement, and the gossips spread like wildfire. People couldn't understand how someone like Adana, so beautiful and full of life, was being forced to marry a beggar. But no one dared to question Zuri, whose influence and manipulation were too powerful for anyone to oppose. As for Adana, she barely recognized the life she was living. The curtains in her room remained closed, and the days dragged by, as if time was prolonging her suffering. She wondered, between silent sobs, how her life had come to this. How could her own father allow something so cruel? The pain of betrayal burned in her chest, and the sense of abandonment grew with each passing day. Adana knew that once she married Taj, her life would never be the same. She would be condemned to a life she hadn't chosen, with a man she didn't know and who didn't even have a roof to shelter her. The fear of the unknown and the weight of humiliation consumed her every thought. No matter how hard she tried to find a way out, Adana was lost. The image of the impending marriage suffocated her. It was as if her fate had already been sealed, and she had no strength left to fight against it. The idea of marrying Taj, of living a life of misery and sadness, felt more and more real. There was nothing she could do. Zuri was winning, and Adana felt powerless against the control her stepmother had over everything and everyone. Taj, on the other hand, was also consumed by a whirlwind of emotions. Every time his eyes met Adana's, he felt the weight of guilt. He knew he was destroying the life of an innocent young woman, but at the same time, he couldn't see how he could back out now. He tried to convince himself that maybe she could learn to accept him, and perhaps they could even find some happiness. But the reality was harsh, and deep down, he knew these were just illusions. The preparations for the wedding continued, even though Adana refused to participate in anything. Zuri, satisfied with the way things were going, walked around the house like a queen, planning every detail with a coldness that made everyone around her fearful. For her, this marriage was more than just a union. It was her final victory over Adana. She would finally be rid of the young woman she so despised, and with that, she would have complete control over the household and over Jair. Adana remained locked in her room, more distant than ever. While everyone around laughed and mocked, Taj remained silent, watching the scene with an enigmatic expression that no one seemed to notice. There was something in the air that he couldn't quite explain, but it kept him quiet, as if he knew that things could take an unexpected turn. Zuri, on the other hand, walked triumphantly through the house, savoring every moment while making sure the wedding preparations were going exactly as planned. When Zuri brought the wedding dress to Adana, she could barely look at it, as it felt like chains binding her to a cruel fate. The big day arrived, and the entire town was buzzing with excitement. Everyone wanted to witness what was sure to be the most talked-about event in a long time. People gathered in groups, whispering and laughing, eager to witness what they believed would be Adana's greatest humiliation. How could someone like her, so beautiful and from a good family, end up marrying a beggar? They said with disdain. No one could understand how the situation had gotten to this point. Adana, on the other hand, was terrified. The weight of what was about to happen felt like it was crushing her. Her legs trembled with every step toward the makeshift altar in the backyard, while the crowd whispered around her. She could feel every gaze, every malicious smile, like daggers piercing her skin. What had she done to deserve this? Adana didn't know the answer. Her heart raced, and she felt as if she were being led into a bottomless abyss. Still, she walked forward with her eyes lowered and her heart heavy. Beside her, Taj walked in silence. Unlike the others, he didn't smile or mock her. He maintained a distant gaze, as if lost in deep thoughts. Occasionally, he glanced at Adana, as if wanting to say something but quickly withdrew. Zuri smiled with satisfaction, watching from a distance. For her, everything was going exactly as planned. Every detail of the wedding was another piece in her cruel game. And seeing Adana so vulnerable and with no way out made her feel victorious. Jair watched everything with a heavy heart, but he believed he was doing what was best for his daughter. Shattered, Adana arrived at the altar. The laughter and whispers around her made the moment even crueler. She wanted to run, to escape and never return, but she knew she had nowhere to go. Zuri had made sure she had no escape. When Taj stood beside her, still calm and mysterious, Adana looked at him, searching for answers she knew he couldn't give. She was about to marry a man she barely knew, while the crowd waited eagerly, ready to laugh at her pain. As the crucial moment of the wedding arrived, she kept her eyes down, ready to accept the fate that seemed inevitable. However, something unexpected happened. Taj, who had remained silent until then, raised his hand to speak. His voice, though calm, echoed through the crowd, capturing everyone's attention. He looked around, observing each curious face, until his gaze finally landed on Zuri, and then on Adana. "I have something to say," he began, his tone calm but firm. The guests, who had been eager to witness Adana's humiliation, now stared at him in surprise. "I am not who you think I am." A murmur ran through the crowd. Zuri, initially confident, frowned in irritation at the interruption. "I am not just a beggar. I come from a wealthy and influential family. I was betrayed by the people I trusted most, which is how I ended up on the streets. But the truth is, I didn't stay there out of weakness. It was a choice." The shock in the crowd was immediate. Eyes turned to Taj with newfound curiosity. Adana, who had been frozen in pain and fear, looked at him with wide eyes, unable to believe what she was hearing. "What?" Zuri muttered, trying to maintain control of the situation. But Taj ignored her. He continued, now with an intense gaze sweeping the audience. "I was betrayed by those I trusted most, and among them is Zuri." The whispers grew louder. Zuri, now visibly uncomfortable, tried to intervene. "This is absurd," she shouted, her voice filled with fury and disbelief. "You're lying." But Taj didn't flinch. He looked her directly in the eyes, unwavering, and continued his revelation. "She was part of a conspiracy to steal everything I had, believing I would never return, that I would stay on the streets forever forgotten. But I came back, and I came back to expose her." The impact of Taj's words was devastating. The crowd, which had been ready to laugh at Adana, now looked at Zuri with disapproval and shock. Zuri, panicking, tried desperately to maintain her composure. "This is nothing but a ridiculous lie," she insisted, but her nervousness betrayed her. "He's trying to defame me. Don't believe him." Adana, who had been standing motionless until that moment, felt an enormous weight lift from her shoulders. Everything made sense now. Zuri's coldness, her constant manipulations, the unjust decisions that seemed designed to ruin her life. She couldn't believe what she was hearing, but at the same time, she felt immense relief growing inside her. Her fate, which seemed sealed with that humiliating marriage, was now changing before her eyes. Taj then turned to Adana, his gaze soft and sincere. "I never wanted to be part of this cruel plan. I was pushed into it, but I never intended to hurt you. And now, more than ever, I'm here to right the wrong." Zuri, on the other hand, was cornered. Her plans were unraveling in front of everyone, and the control she had always held over the situation was slipping through her fingers. "This is ridiculous," she shouted again, but this time her voice lacked the strength it once had. The crowd no longer believed her. Taj, now revealed to be much more than he appeared, remained firm. "This wedding should never have happened," he declared. "It was a scheme to humiliate an innocent young woman. And now the truth has finally come to light. Zuri not only tried to destroy Adana's life, but also conspired to ruin me in the past. But it ends here." Mr. Jair, still confused and unable to believe what was happening, shouted, "How could you, Zuri? How could you do something so terrible? You destroyed my daughter." Zuri, desperate, tried to defend herself. "This is a lie. He's making it all up." However, Taj didn't stop there. He presented evidence that exposed Zuri's conspiracies. Documents, witnesses, and even records of illegal transactions were in his hands. He revealed how Zuri had betrayed her own family and conspired against his fortune. The evidence was undeniable. The police were called, and after reviewing the evidence, they declared, "You are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and several other crimes," said one of the officers as they placed handcuffs on her wrists. As Zuri was taken away, Adana remained at the altar, in shock at everything that had happened. Tears still flowed down her face, but this time they were tears of relief and liberation. Amid all the confusion, Jair fell to his knees, crying in front of his daughter. "Adana, my daughter, forgive me," he sobbed, his voice choked with regret. "I was a terrible father. I didn't believe you. I didn't see what was happening. I failed in every possible way." Jair crawled to Adana's feet, desperate for her forgiveness. With a gentle gesture, she knelt beside him, wrapped her arms around him, and hugged him tightly. "I forgive you, father. We were both victims, and now we need to move forward." Taj approached her and said, "I've always admired your kindness and patience, even in the most difficult circumstances. Now that everything has been revealed, I want you to know that I want to start a new life with you. Not out of obligation, but because you deserve something much better." Surprised and moved, she allowed herself to embrace something new, and as time passed and the chaos of the revelation dissipated, love began to bloom between them. What had once seemed like a forced and humiliating marriage turned into a celebration of redemption, justice, and finally love. Adana's fate, which everyone believed was sealed in tragedy, now unfolded with happy possibilities. The union that was supposed to be a mark of pain and suffering became, days later, a symbol of renewal and hope for both Adana and Taj. Let me know in the comments what you thought of today's story, and if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as we'll be back with more emotional stories for you. Thank you for watching this far. Hugs!